You're listening to Ep.5 of the Fearless English podcast. Welcome to the Fearless English podcast, where it's all about helping you confidently communicate with anyone without compromising who you are. Let's get started, fearless learner. Our next guest is a very good friend of mine who was born in Louisiana, America. He currently works in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and he is also a cultural ambassador with over 100,000 followers across his social media platforms. On top of all of that, AskTeacherWill also continues to work on helping students value their identity instead of thinking that there's something wrong with their accent, to work on loving their accent, understanding that it's part of their identity, and not conforming to the belief that there's something wrong with you if you have a certain accent. If you want to check out Will's work, all you have to do is type ask_teacherwill. That's ask_teacherwill on all social media platforms, and you'll be able to find him. I've also provided links to all his social media platforms below this podcast in the show notes. Hello, Will. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm super excited for today's conversation. We're focusing on what is your hometown like? We'll get started with where you were born. So your hometown growing up, can you describe it for me? What was it
Sure.
like?
So very quickly, my hometown where I actually was born, I stayed there for probably a total of 2 years. So I was born in a town called Nacogdoches, which was in Louisiana. Most people are not familiar with that, or if they are familiar with that, if people know the movie or have seen the movie called Steel Magnolias with Sally Field, Olympia Dukakis, Julia Roberts, then that's where I was born. So I have Southern roots. Yet my mother and father met in the South, and yet they migrated because my father was from the North, even though they met in college. So my hometown, though I was born in Louisiana or Nacogdoches, I consider my hometown Morristown, New Jersey. And so if you ask me to compare Natchitoches from Morristown, they are completely apples and oranges different. So I can talk about Morristown because those were the formative years of where I grew up.
Well, so before we talk about that, I mean, can you just paint a quick picture of what it was like to live there?
Oh, in Morristown? Sure. No problem. Morristown, New Jersey. Well, the good thing was I have a lot of fond memories of Morristown. I'll describe the city. It is a city which is about 30 to 40 minutes northwest of New York City. So it is considered to be a suburb of New Jersey. Morristown, I think when I was growing up, probably had a population of 20,000 individuals.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing about Morristown is and was for me is that my father's side of the family lived there. So my grandmother lived there, my uncle lived there, my cousins lived there. So it was, it's a town where everybody in my family, we lived like 10 minutes from each other. Morristown was a diversity in terms of races and ethnicities. Morristown, I remember Morristown in terms of having the train tracks, because if you wanted to go to New York City, you would, get on the train tracks. Morristown was also known for something extremely important to me that happened in my family every Friday night. My mother decided not to cook because she cooked for myself and my siblings, and her off day was Friday. And so it was a tradition that Friday night we had Chinese food, and there was a famous Chinese restaurant called August Moon. Uh, what I also remember about Morristown, which is interesting, I don't know if a lot of people realize this. However, Morristown in Morristown, New Jersey, actually was the site and is the site of the George Washington Museum and the George Washington House. So our first president of the United States was George Washington. If you go to Morristown, you can see his house, where he first lived and also had, and there's a museum there now. What else about Morristown do I remember and love? Well, Morristown, when I was a kid growing up, I don't know if it's still in production. However, there is a famous company called Menon Company. Menon was known for the production of men's fragrances, whether it was cologne and or deodorant. And so, one of the fond memories that I have about Morristown was part of Men and Company. They also had an arena, an ice skating arena. And during my teenage years, I would go ice skating every Friday. And yes, there are some people, Black people, or those of African descent, that actually do ice skate. At least I'm one of them.
So,
Um,
what would people outside of your town say? I mean, how would they describe your town, would you think? Like, what do you think they would say about your town if you could ask them?
I would say I think they would know it from a couple things. I think in terms of landmarks, they would know it as it relates to Men in Arena, Men in Company, Washington Monument, also the green, because in the center of Morristown, we had the green. And for those that are like, well, what's the green? What does that mean? Well, imagine if you were going through the center of Morristown, and you were, say, going around a cul-de-sac. Well, in the center of town, there was just a plot of land with the monument in there in the park. And so the green was, I would say, basically a lot of people knew that. And around the green, you had churches, you had a synagogue, you had a famous department store, Bamberger's, which is no longer in produced, where my grandmother worked. You also had another famous store where I first, as a child, bought my first suit, Roots. So, and those are particular landmarks. I think also people would describe Morristown as quaint, diverse,
Mm,
and cold during the winter.
amazing. Okay, so could you tell me last question for your hometown where you grew up. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of living in your hometown? So, I can give you a few examples. Like in London, where I live, one of the disadvantages is that the rent is really high.
Hmm. Okay, great. Advantages. My family was there. It was diverse.
Yeah.
There were two parks that I went to as a kid, Burnham Park and Lewis Morris Park. Burnham Park, I fed the ducks, particularly in the summer and the fall. And in Lewis Morris Park, I used to swim because there was a lake in the middle of the park,
Oh.
and also go to the Micah Mart. So family, park. Um, Also, I think that I think another advantage is that Morristown was it was generational in terms of families. So a lot of families knew each other, particularly where I grew up in a section of Morristown, Collinsville. So that was an advantage because, me growing up as a child, it was kind of like, okay, yes, I had one biological mother, yet my neighbor, ooh, she was my mother. My grandmother was my mother. My aunt was my mother. So I think that was another advantage. And then also too, I think diversity. I mean, in ways we had different racial and ethnic groups. I mean, they might have been quote unquote, or people would say, okay, well, they might have been segregated, but I think that sometimes people feel more comfortable living with each other, whoever they identify. But also, we had a mixed area of that. So I think those were advantages. In terms of disadvantages, it's interesting thinking about it now, because you mentioned the aspect about rents. Um, I don't, in comparison to London, I don't think they were. To be honest with you, I can't really think of any disadvantages. Oh, maybe with the exception of, um, yes, disadvantage sometimes, particularly during the summer, because people would want to go to the beach, and or people would come into Morristown because we had different festivities and festivals. Was traffic sometimes that was a disadvantage.
Hmm. Nice. Amazing. I think we've got like a an idea of what it's like there. Now, would you be able to compare it to where you live now?
Jeddah,
Um,
Saudi Arabia.
yeah, like
It's
your
night and
hometown.
day. It's completely night and day. How is it night and day? Jeddah is a bigger city
Okay.
than Jeddah is a bigger city than Morristown. It's a completely different culture than Morristown. It's a completely different country. So there are more differences than I think there are similarities. What would the similarities be? Well, I think similarities that come to my mind would be aspect of family. You have that certainly in Jeddah. You definitely have that in Morristown. What's another similarity?
The
Both
traffic.
people yeah, well, no, there's actually more traffic in Jeddah than there is in Morristown. Totally. Um, I mean, no, that's just that, to me, comparing Morristown to Jeddah is like comparing Morristown to Natchitoches. It's just
Mm,
completely different. Plus, I was a child. So when I was in
yeah.
Morristown, I was a child and now I'm an adult. So,
So, I mean, so your area in Saudi right now, what is it known for? Is there anything there that's like famous or
oh, yeah, Jeddah's known for a lot of famous things, in my opinion. So if there are any Saudis listening to this phone or the Jiddawalis listening to the phone, if I miss something, please forgive me. But teacher Halima asked me, when I think of Jeddah, what is Jeddah famous for? Jeddah to me is famous for the Corniche. Jeddah to me is famous for having the bicycle right like in a roundabout. Jeddah is famous for having a museum. Jeddah is famous for snorkeling, for Ubhar, for the Red Sea. Excuse me. Jeddah is famous for the traditional food, different types of kapsa or mendi. Jeddah is famous for al baik, and for
Oh
those
yeah,
people
I
that don't
heard
know
that
what,
they're gonna
for
be
yeah, for
going
people
to
that
the UAE now. They've got a
yes,
franchise now
yes.
going.
Yes, I mean Jeddah, like Jeddah Albake, and for those people that don't know what Albake is, it's kind of like if you're an American, you've ever heard of like KFC or Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's equivalent to that. And then certainly Jeddah is famous for its proximity in terms of uh, Mecca, Medina. So I love Jeddah. When I first came to Saudi Arabia, I had the opportunity of living my first international assignment when I migrated and transitioned from business into teaching was obviously in Saudi Arabia, and I had the choice between Riyadh and Jeddah. And one of the reasons why I chose Jeddah were really two. Number one, it was close to the water, and growing up as a kid in Morristown, and then also subsequently in Chicago before I moved to Saudi Arabia, I was used to the water. I like water, so um,
Yeah.
I was like Jeddah. There it is. They got the Red
Yeah,
Sea. I can go
nature.
swimming
Yeah.
and go to the beach.
I think
So it was
Jeddah is much more cosmopolitan than Riyadh too, isn't it?
Well, I would think that you should consult your Saudi audience in there. Some people would make the argument that Riyadh is more cosmopolitan and, they have better restaurants, or it's certainly the capital, so they have more disposable income.
Mm.
And, they're, in my opinion, Riyadh streets are better than Jeddah. But what I would say personally about Jeddah for me is that I really liked, I like the aspect of diversity in Jeddah in comparison to other cities. But
Mhm.
again, I recognize this is not my country. I'm an immigrant. So, but I love Jeddah. If I had the choice of living between Jeddah and Riyadh, I'm sorry if there are any Riyadhis listening to the phone. I've been to the capital, but I love Jeddah. It's like my second home.
Yeah. Wow, like I mean, I didn't really expect it to go this way, but it was really interesting to see you compare between your hometown where you grew up to Jeddah. And I like how you described it as like night and day. Um, so there's a lot of aspects where like family, where it involves family, which is very similar. Like when we spoke in another meeting that we had, you talked about how family is so important, how like it takes a village to raise a kid, and you have a lot of community where you're from.
Yes. Thinking about it in retrospect, as I think as I get older, I appreciate my hometown. I appreciate Morristown a lot more. Why? Because it was family. I mean, I grew up in a very family oriented aspect, and obviously that's a different generation. I'm probably older than most people on the call, but in the sense of it takes a community, it takes a village to raise a child. It was that, and so in Morristown, it was family, and my biological family, my extended family, my neighbors were my family. And so, that's carried with me, which I think it's really, really important, at least for me. So growing up as a kid, I used to hate it. It was like, oh, if I did something wrong, Mrs. McCann, my neighbor, who's my mother, would tell my mother. Or if I did, if I wanted to just be a normal kid, my cousin would say, uh. But looking at it now, no, it was about family, and so I appreciate that. And that is, I think, a similarity with respect to Jeddah, in terms of community and family and stuff that I have seen lineages. And, I guess it's still there because I've kind of quote unquote been adopted by this woman Mama, who I call Mama, who is Saudi. And then every Friday after, she has me over, after she goes to, for prayer, she has me over for dinner and she adopted me. She calls me her Black American son. So, I guess the vestiges of family are important. But no, I think that's how family is important, and it's interesting because I think that you know how that is carried over in terms of my style of teaching. It's very interesting. I'm known as AskTeacherWill, but I say the ATW family. I don't call them followers. I don't call them learners. I call them family. I hope the followers recognize that. I don't know. You'd have to ask, the
Yeah,
ATW family followers or whatever. But I don't like that word, so I call them family.
I love that. Okay, so we're gonna stop there in terms of this topic, but I'm excited to go to the next section, which I'm just gonna give you a few either questions or things like that I wanna know about whatever
First
like
thing that
comes.
comes from my
Yeah, first
mind.
thing that comes to your head. Yeah, your mind.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, here we
I'm
go.
scared. I'm scared. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay, so first question, what is your favorite English word?
First word that came to my mind is passion,
Oh, I love that.
because without passion, in my own personal passion, without passion, there is no life for me. And passion has implication both in my personal life and professional life. If people are listening to this podcast and they want to learn English or they want to aspire to their goals, passion, the desire, the eagerness, the passion, definitely.
Amazing. Okay, so are you currently learning any other languages?
I'll answer that question to be determined. And if I was learning any particular future language, I would not tell people until I was at a particular level of fluency. But I do know how
Oh,
to speak another language other than English.
which
Sometimes
is?
it's good. Would you like me to speak a little now or just say the language?
Well, I won't know what you're saying, but it depends.
Oh, that's true. I'm sorry. Okay, well, maybe you will know. Bonjour, je m'appelle Guillaume, j'étudie le français pour 8 ans. I speak
Oh, very
French.
nice. French is
I
so
speak French.
amazing. It's so, I feel like the language is so elegant to compare to English. But I understand basic. So you said, hi, my name is
Yeah, I said my name is William, and I've studied French for 8 years, actually 8 plus years,
oh
and then I'm
wow.
actually in the process of studying another language, but I would leave that. Sometimes it's good
It's a
not to let
secret.
someone know.
Okay.
It's Yeah, well, sometimes it's good not to know so that when people say things about you, then you just
That's
play
the
really dumb
best.
and stuff.
What do you think of when you hear fearless English?
Teacher Halima.
Oh my God, no. Forget teacher Halima.
Well, you asked me the question. It was the first thing that came from my mind. You asked me the question, fearless English. Well, I believe that I follow teacher Halima from Blackboard English, and she has a thing that says fearless learner. So the
But
first thing
what
that came
what
to
do
my
you
mind,
what do you think the message means?
fearless, without trepidation, going for it, not worrying about what people think. And fearless to me is just recognizing that for me, fear is real, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a person cannot overcome it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, last thing. One message to share with the students before you go.
A message. I have, okay, please indulge me 1 second. I have two quick messages. Number one, though it might seem impossible, through persistence and belief in oneself, all things are possible to those who believe. That's the first one. All things are possible to those that believe, and that's not original. That's a quote from Nelson Mandela. The second one, what I would say is that I really, hopefully, people that decide to be part of the ATW family understand is that we learn together. And so I think that those particular quotes, I think, in my own life, both personally and professionally, have aided me. And hopefully, I think that as it relates to English and their goals, I think they're very applicable.
Thank you so much, Will. That was amazing. Thank you so much for coming today. I really enjoyed this conversation. And hopefully, we have you here again talking to us about other English related things.
So again, Teacher Halima, Melissa, I want to say thank you very much again for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm humbled by that. More importantly, two quick things. Number one is that I hope for those individuals that are listening to the podcast, take this information and ask them. I hope they ask themselves the question, what can they learn from it? Hopefully something. And I just wanted to also say to you, continued blessings and continued support for the great job that you're doing. You're really changing lives, regardless of the fact if you know it. But if you don't know it, I'm just here to let you know that you are. But I'm sure your fearless learners also let you know that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Right. I hope you enjoyed the conversation between Teacher Will and I. And now I'm going to help you take action. So today we're going to do something a little bit different to the previous lesson, which was on travel. Today we're going to focus on vocabulary related to hometown. So I have a list of words that Teacher Will and I mentioned in the conversation. And today I want you to focus on using the dictionary to help you understand the words. But before you do that, first you're going to check your spelling. That's number one. And that's the beauty of the podcast. You can check your spelling, and I'll read out some words, and all you have to do is write the words down. Then you're going to try and guess the meaning of these words from context. So listen to the podcast again and try to think about the meaning of these words. Then I want you to check the dictionary and to see if you've understood the meaning from context. This takes practice, so don't think that, the first time round you'll get it right, but it's actually a really good practice because it helps you understand words from context, so the teacher doesn't have to explain the words every single time. So that's your homework. First, I'm going to read out the words, write down and try to guess the meaning of the words. Then check the dictionary and make sure that you notice what are the words that are around these words. Write down the example sentences that are given to you in the dictionary of your choice that you've chosen to check the meaning. Okay, so word number one, migrated. Suburb, population, diverse city, landmarks, monument, generational, night and day. What is it known for? Cosmopolitan, disposable income, immigrant. So those are the list of words. I'm going to put them in the show notes so that you can check, just in case you didn't hear it. But remember that it's important for you to go back. If you can't hear the words, listen to the podcast again. Try to listen to the word as many times as possible before you move forward, and then check the answers in the description. I'm not going to be providing the meaning because I want you to check the meaning in the dictionary and then notice what are the words around these vocabulary words that I've taught you. And one more thing, if you want extra homework, choose one word and teach it to someone else. This will really help you remember it. Pick a word that's extra difficult for you and teach someone else the word. All right, my friend, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week with another podcast. Bye. Hello, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out the Female Language Academy. It's my monthly membership for women where I provide lessons to help students develop their English fluency. All you have to do is go to www.blackboardenglish.com/FLA. That's www.blackboardenglish.com/FLA. See you in class.